Well, the leading candidate for who Alabama is going to target is Oregon head coach Dan Lanning, a former GC at Alabama back in what year, PJ? 2015? Something like that. Former, obviously, defensive coordinator for Georgia in the national championship. Felt like this was going to be a Duck Dynasty. He put that on his Christmas card, Duck Dynasty. Dynasties last more than 2 years, PJ. We can't have Dan Lanning leaving before we finish business.
Yeah, no. So I was talking about to this with Nick off air, and we both agree the same thing. Trista, Dan Lanning might be like the odds-on favorite right now at these books offshore and all that, and he might be the guy that Bama is targeting number one. If you're Dan Lanning, though, like, why would you leave Oregon? You have it so good right now. You're bringing in this great recruiting class. You just got Dylan Gabriel as your quarterback. You're going to the Big Ten, where Michigan's probably going to be down if Harbaugh leaves. Washington's not going to be nearly as good. Why would you go to a place with impossible expectation?
How early in the season for you, Brandon, did you realize he's the truth?
Oh, well, if I was going to pinpoint it, I mean, look, we're watching him in training camp. We're talking to him throughout. And so there were some indications, some stuff behind the scenes that made you think, okay, this guy's got a little bit more of an it factor than maybe we gave him credit for. Maybe you don't get as much exposure to college guys as you do in the NFL. It's like even immediately, even with rookies. So there were some things that stood out behind the scenes, but obviously it's got to play out on the field. And I would point out week 3. Like I would point out the trip to Jacksonville when they go out there and they beat Jacksonville by 20 points. Now, there were some flukish things that happened. They had a fullback run a kickoff for a touchdown, 80-plus yards for a touchdown. There have only been 3 kickoffs, I believe, that have been run for a touchdown this year. 2 of them are from the Texans. 1 of them was from their fullback. And so, like, you had some really flukish things that happened in that game, but C.J. Stroud was sublime. He followed it up with another performance in kind against the Pittsburgh Steelers, did it again against the New Orleans Saints. And so it was really early on in the year, I'd say the first quarter of the season, it became clear that the Texans had something here. Was he going to be elite? Was it what we feel like it is now? Not necessarily. I'd say it wasn't until the back-to-back games, one at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they come back with 46 seconds left on the clock. They engineer a 40-second drive to win the game, a touchdown to Tank Dell to win the game, and then the next week he outduels Joe Burrow on the road. And so that was it. That was when it was the rubber stamp on it. It confirmed the things that we had seen earlier in the season.
You know, you're obviously up close to this team compared to where we are, and I feel like when I see C.J. Stroud, I just see somebody that just looks so mature. Like, there's somebody that has this poise. And I think one of the things that stood out to me early on, especially I think what he threw for 384 week 2, and you're going, he doesn't have a good offensive line, and he's just standing tall in the pocket. He's making great decisions. And even in press conferences, you know, you can just kind of see how some guy has like that leadership it factor. Does it come across that way for you guys down there too, maybe even more, where you just go, God, this kid's just way more mature than we even realized?
Yeah, so I was on Sports Radio 16 here locally earlier in the day and was asked a question about, hey, does the hype or the excitement feel any different with it being, you know, a playoff game? A lot of these guys first, the turnaround, which a lot of the people on the team now don't like being associated with the turnaround if they weren't here last year because they just, you know, they don't feel associated with it. But to your question, the answer is no, because they are remarkably consistent. I would say this about C.J. Stroud and the head coach DeMeco Ryans, whether they're playing well, coaching well, whether they're winning, whether they're losing, it's kind of the same. Like the energy around the building is kind of the same, never too high, never too low. But it like in terms of C.J. Stroud and the maturity, I would say, like I talked about some of the stuff, the intangible stuff off the field, observing them behind the scenes. But on the field, I think the thing that we did not give enough credit for, maybe just did not know what to expect without having seen it in the NFL, was how good of a decision maker he would be as a young player. Like, we knew that he was an accurate quarterback. His tape shows that he's an accurate quarterback in college, and that's the reason why he was such a highly touted prospect. But how would he come in and handle the moment, and what type of decisions would he make with the football as a rookie? And this guy makes veteran decisions with the football. He has a veteran-like understanding of the game, which was not something that we could have predicted from having not known him.
Rachaad White has had 15 or more carries in 6 of the last 7 games. Like, do you think he's the key piece of really this team having a chance to upset the Eagles? Or I know you said that the passing game needs to get going first, but it feels like you got to run the ball against these Eagles too.
Yeah, I agree. And it might be more perimeter runs. They tried too many runs between the tackles and got eaten alive back in week 3. It's interesting because this is the second time that the Bucs will play the Eagles, right? Dave Canales, who's a rookie play caller, does have a season's worth of experience to draw from. But I think there's 3 critical games to kind of point to. If you go back and look at the first game against the Falcons, which was a 16-13 loss here in Tampa, the Bucs offense didn't do much, didn't put many points on the board, and what they did just didn't work that game. So in the rematch in Atlanta in December, they put 27 points on the board because Dave Canales didn't have anything that really worked to draw from. So he had to come up with a brand new game plan, essentially. When the Buccaneers beat the Saints in week 4, 26-9, that was their highest scoring output at the time. I think that when they played the Saints again and lost 23-13, they fell behind 20-0. They relied too much on what worked in the past in that previous game. And the same thing with the Panthers. They scored 21 points on Carolina in Tampa, beating them 21-18, and again, tried to do too much of the same thing in the rematch. So I think the lesson for Dave Canales is you have to come up with different game plans when you play opponents twice. And again, the good news for him is not much worked in week 3 against the Eagles. So I think he has to look at what has worked since then, getting Rachaad White involved in the screen game as a receiver, using him on outside runs as much as in between the tackles. And so I do think that he will play a key role in this game from a total yardage standpoint. He might have more receiving yards in this game than rushing yards, but if they can find a way to cobble together a 100-yard game, however that looks, from Rachaad White, then I think they'll have some success. I do think that he is a key factor in this game, and he's dealing with a little bit of nagging injuries that he suffered last week in Carolina, so we'll see how it goes.
Talking to Carrington Harrison, BetMGM tonight. On the other side of things, the Chiefs' defense, second in total defense this year, second in points allowed. I mean, massive improvement from what we've seen in the past, which in a lot of ways has certainly kept this team afloat, given the fact that the offense has had its struggles and Mahomes' numbers have really been down across the board with the ongoing receiver struggles that you've talked about plenty. We've talked about plenty literally just here. But how much of a surprise is this defense and the results that this team has gotten from it this year?
That's a great question about the defense. I mean, I think you had a feeling that this could be a really good defense in the offseason and as the season has progressed. And I think it's been one of the 5 best defenses in the National Football League. You look at Chris Jones, I think he has a chance to be first team All-Pro. You look at the other defensive linemen, Mike Gann has been really good. Charles Omenihu, he's been great the last couple of weeks. You look at Snead, he's been really good. The Chiefs have done a really good job against big-time wide receivers. I know you guys hasn't asked me this question specifically yet, but I just don't believe in Miami's offense the way that everybody else does. I know that they were third this year in points, and they put up so many points. They didn't score against anybody good. I mean, if you're Carolina, Miami's scary. If you're the Giants, Miami is really scary. If you're the Minnesota Vikings, I'd be terrified about Miami. Who have they beat that's good this year? Who have they scored against that was good this year? They scored 17 points against Philadelphia earlier this year. Everybody has scored against Philadelphia. Miami is the most overrated and fraudulent team in the entire postseason. They will be in Cancun by Monday morning.